let's take a look at this issue of Amazing Spider-Man, number 76 here. This one's a little bit unique because this one is in fact illustrated by Jim Mooney. Now, this I find interesting. In the credits, you'll notice that you'll have, before, it's announced that Jim Mooney did the illustration, Buscema, it'll say innovator, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I find that funny because just previous to that, Buscema was doing a few issues there. I think 3 or 4 of them, right? And if you're familiar with the history, he talks about a period where he was handed that assignment, Romita was kind of stepping away from it. He was feeling burnt out, whatever, right? And, he had new responsibilities, I guess, being artistic director, whatever. But Buscema, who's amazing, right? His anatomy's impeccable, all of that. His Conan work, phenomenal, right? With all due respect, one of my favorite artists from that Bronze Age period. I guess I became a big fan after getting my hands or mitts on that book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, back in the day, just as a kid. But the point I want to make here is I find it funny how, I hadn't really noticed this before, but in this issue, 76, Mooney doing the full illustration, it's really good, actually. Really tight. Everything's there. So he's doing the penciling and inking, which is important to point out, right? Because in general, if people remember or even know who Jim Mooney is, and I don't mean any disrespect by that, it is from, the 70s and early 80s. Now, my go-to guys, when I was trying to learn how to draw in the late 70s and early 80s, were names like, at the time, Keith Pollard, who was doing the Spider-Man work under the writing of Marv Wolfman. And it was around that period that I actually started reading the books. I think, 10 years old, something like that, right? Before then, I was just collecting them, drawing here and there. But, so I'd look at that stuff, and that was basically the kind of thing that I would try to imitate, right? In the idea that this was how I figured if I would learn how to imitate what I was seeing, I was on the right track. And I have some of that work still, actually. But the point was, Keith Pollard being one of the main artists. The other one was to follow after the Wolfman run and stuff was John Romita Jr. And I remember that name would always stick out for some sort of reason. It had a ring to it, fell off the tongue, so I'd remember it. Now, before that, at that time, Keith Pollard, I didn't really know the name per se. I wasn't paying attention to credits on the work. I would simply look at them and it would have visual impact. And that would be my tool for learning, right? Just basically what I was seeing and what I could imitate. But Mooney was all over the place. And you see, as an inker, that's the thing. A lot of the art that was being displayed was inked by Mooney. Oh yeah, like Mooney made many an artist look fantastic. Not that they weren't talented to begin with. The other Spider-Man artist back in the day that was having an impact was John Byrne on the Marvel Team-Up stuff, and the other guy was Ross Andrew, who had done the, earlier, 72, 73, and so on, Spider-Man stuff, where, by that time, in the late 70s and early 80s, they were already reprinting the 73 and 74 stuff, right? So it was still on the stands, and kids my age at that time were still picking up on it. But
important to note that Mooney wasn't inking those covers, but it's I'm just trying to point out that Ross Andrew was on the radar at that time through the reprints of the Marvel Tales issues.
You know, as you look into things, you start to realize that Mooney was all over the place. As in, you know, a villain, he could do anything. It was basically, you know, I mean, he'd go in there and I haven't looked into it this far, but I'm imagining he was, well, what you would call part of the bullpen. You know, a bullpen is like you're a staff artist, meaning you get thrown into the mix and they use you where they need you, sort of thing, instead of handing you like, okay, you're going to do the Spider-Man run, you're going to do the Daredevil run, okay, we want to know how you feel about doing X-Men, or what, you know what I mean, being handed a full project. You just go in and you do the work where it's needed. Right? I imagine he was a staff guy. I don't know. I'd have to check into that. But he was all over the place. If you look at it, he was inking everybody. So in this particular issue, what makes it so great is that, you know, he was illustrating and inking it. And I find it funny because Buscema, in the histories, as I was saying, he started complaining. He did like maybe 3 or 4 books, as I said, and then said, oh, he couldn't... You know, in interviews later, he'd say, oh, I couldn't stand the book. I hated the character. I hated all the villains, and I hate. You know what it probably was? I'm imagining that it was, you know, if anyone has ever tried to draw this character outside of the Ditko impression, it's the webbing that has to be mastered in order for you to pull it off. And Romita was kind of like the guide to the other artists that would come onto the book, and he'd say, look, this is how you got to do it, and he'd break it down. And believe it or not, when you're learning how to draw that, it is actually a lot more difficult than you think. It's not just a matter of putting all the line work in, it's getting the lines right, proportionately, you know, especially when you're talking about figures that are twisted in all these different angles. It's a lot harder than you think, and anyone who's remembers first trying to tackle it will tell you that. They know it. But, yeah, I just thought that if people, you know, Mooney discusses in later interviews some of the work he was doing earlier, before Marvel and before Stan. But if you want to see some good work when he gets up there and busy, and what he's busy with Marvel, and you want to see what he was capable of, that issue is definitely one of them. The 76 with the lizard, a great lizard. You know, Mooney has an interesting style. It's, you know, again, I don't think it's one of those big names that people... But I think he really deserves some attention. And underrated. A real professional. If you look at it, it looks like he gets his blacks put in, his outlines, giving the figures a real firmness, right? And then he goes in, it looks like he's using something a little bit thinner. Maybe it's a dip pen, where he's doing finer feathering and stuff. It has a nice, etchy look to it in the feathering. It's really good. So, you know, that's a name that should, you know, it deserves a bit more appreciation. That's Jim Mooney.